The sirens were still screaming when the police cruiser pulled sideways, blocking the ambulance cold. Inside the courtroom, that same officer smirked like it was all a misunderstanding. He laughed. He shrugged. He even rolled his eyes. Judge Judy did not interrupt him. She waited. Then she asked one quiet question that drained the color from his face. Because what happened next did not just end a case. It ended a career. The sirens were already screaming before anyone understood what was wrong. Red and blue lights flooded the intersection, bouncing off windshields and terrified faces. Then the ambulance stopped. Its nose sat inches from a police cruiser parked sideways across the lane, engine off, doors closed like a statement. Inside the ambulance, a monitor beeped faster, sharper, begging for movement that did not come. An EMT leaned forward, gripping the dash, eyes fixed on the road that should have been open. Every second felt louder than the siren. Outside, traffic froze. Horns blared, then died. People leaned out of their cars, phones raised, confusion turning into disbelief. This was not a breakdown. This was a blockade. The officer stood several feet away from his cruiser, body loose, posture careless. One hand rested on his belt, the other waved dismissively at the ambulance, as if it were an inconvenience instead of an emergency. His words were lost under the sirens, but his tone was not. It was irritated, bored, almost amused. Inside the ambulance, the EMT shouted through the window, pointing, pleading. The patient behind them struggled for breath, chest rising unevenly, fingers twitching against a blanket that was already damp with sweat. The smell of antiseptic mixed with fear. Someone whispered, "We are losing time," and no one argued. The officer turned away. He laughed at something a bystander said. Actually laughed. A short, careless sound that cut through the chaos like a slap. He shook his head, took a slow step, and leaned against his cruiser as if this were just another pause in a long shift. The ambulance driver made a decision no one wanted to make. They pulled back. Tires screeched. The siren shifted pitch as the vehicle reversed, searching for another route that should never have been necessary. The crowd reacted all at once. Gasps, shouts, a few curses. Phones followed the ambulance as it disappeared, carrying a life now running out of margin. The officer did not follow it with his eyes. What remained at the intersection was a silence that felt wrong. Not calm, not resolved. Just empty, like something vital had been removed too quickly. A woman near the curb lowered her phone, her face pale. A man shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake himself from a bad dream. The officer finally returned to his cruiser. He did not hurry. He did not look back. That silence did not last. It followed him. It followed him through paperwork and explanations, through a complaint that would not stay buried, through a video that refused to disappear. It followed him all the way to a courtroom where the lights were softer, the air cooler, and the consequences far less patient than the sirens had been. When the courtroom doors opened, the echo of that blocked intersection came with him. And as he walked toward the stand, wearing his uniform like armor, smiling like none of it mattered, the truth was already waiting, seated quietly behind the bench, unmoving, unimpressed. He took the stand like he owned it. The officer adjusted his uniform with practiced ease, smoothing the front as he sat, shoulders back, chin lifted. He glanced around the courtroom, not with nerves, but with familiarity, the look of someone who had testified before and expected the same outcome now, respect, deference, belief. He smiled when he was sworn in, not a nervous smile, not a polite one. It was casual, almost friendly, like this was a formality standing between him and lunch. When he spoke, his voice carried confidence, shaped by years of being listened to without question. He explained the incident calmly, too calmly. He described the intersection as controlled. The cruiser, he said, was positioned for safety. The ambulance delay was brief, necessary, unfortunate, but unavoidable. He used words like protocol and discretion, stacking them neatly as if careful language could erase what the sirens had sounded like. From the gallery, the EMT sat still, hands folded so tightly the knuckles had lost color. They did not interrupt. They did not react. Their eyes stayed forward, fixed on a point just past the bench, as if looking anywhere else would pull them back into that moment. The officer noticed. His smile widened slightly. He leaned into the microphone and shrugged, a small gesture that carried something heavier than it should have. "I understand emotions run high in emergencies," he said, voice even, rehearsed. "But my job is to control the scene." Control. The word landed and lingered. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. The cameras did not move. Judge Judy did not react. She sat back in her chair, hands resting calmly, eyes steady behind her glasses. She did not interrupt him. She did not challenge him. She let him continue. That silence emboldened him. He talked longer now. About training, about experience, about split-second decisions that civilians could not understand. He framed himself as the only adult in a chaotic situation, the only one thinking clearly while everyone else panicked. The ambulance, he implied, had overreacted. He laughed softly at his own phrasing, a quick exhale through the nose, a sound meant to signal confidence. The EMT's jaw tightened. Judge Judy made a note, just one. The sound of pen against paper cut through the officer's voice for a fraction of a second. He noticed it. His eyes flicked toward the bench, then away. The smile stayed, but it no longer reached his eyes. When he finished, he sat back, satisfied. He had told his story. Clean, orderly, professional, the kind of testimony that usually ended cases before they really began. The courtroom waited. Judge Judy looked up from her notes and studied him for a long moment. Not stern, not angry, measuring. Like someone deciding how much truth a person was ready to hear. "Officer," she said finally, her voice calm, almost conversational. He leaned forward slightly, ready. "Let us talk about the timeline." The confidence on his face did not vanish, but it paused, just long enough to be noticed. The room shifted the moment the EMT stood. No dramatic movement, no speech prepared in advance, just a slow rise from the chair, as if standing itself required permission. The EMT adjusted their jacket once, took a breath that did not quite settle, and faced the bench. They did not look at the officer. "I have been doing this for 11 years, the EMT began, voice steady but thin, like it had already been used too much that day. "I know what urgency sounds like. I know what seconds feel like." They described the call without embellishment. A patient in respiratory distress, oxygen levels dropping, chest tight, skin clammy. Not rare, not unusual, but serious enough that time was the difference between stabilizing and spiraling. The courtroom listened as the EMT spoke about the siren, how it was not noise, but language, a warning, a request, sometimes a plea. They explained how intersections were usually handled, how officers moved instinctively, how most people understood what those lights meant. "This time," they said quietly, no one moved. The EMT paused. Their fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. They talked about the moment they saw the cruiser. Sideways. Parked. Engine off. About how they assumed at first that it would move any second. Then about how that second stretched, and stretched again. The monitor began to beep faster. The patient's breathing became shallow, uneven, like air itself was slipping away. "We knocked," the EMT said. "We waved, we yelled." Their voice wavered on that last word, just enough to be heard. They explained the decision to reroute, how no one wanted to make it, how rerouting meant adding minutes they did not have, how turning the ambulance around felt like admitting defeat to something that should never have been an obstacle. From the stand, the officer shifted. Just once. A small adjustment of his leg, his shoe scraping lightly against the floor. The EMT described the back of the ambulance, the smell of antiseptic, the patient's hand gripping the edge of the stretcher, fingers weak, desperate, the sound of the siren changing pitch as they reversed course, a sound the EMT said they would never forget. "I kept thinking," they said, swallowing hard, "that we were being delayed by choice, not traffic, not weather, A choice. The courtroom felt smaller now. Even the cameras seemed closer. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the bench. Her eyes never left the EMT's face. She did not interrupt. She did not rush them. The EMT finished with a sentence that landed heavier than anything before it. "We did everything we could," they said. "Except get there on time." Silence followed. Not the tense kind, the kind that arrives when something important has already been said and cannot be taken back. Judge Judy nodded once, slowly. Then she turned her gaze to the officer. Her voice was calm, controlled. "Why?" she asked. "Did you not move your vehicle?" The officer opened his mouth. And for the first time since taking the stand, nothing came out. The officer found his voice again quickly. He straightened in his chair, shoulders squaring as if posture alone could restore control. "I followed procedure," he said, a little louder than before. "I was managing the scene." Managing. Not blocking. Not delaying. Managing. He explained that the intersection was unstable. Too many cars. Too many variables. He claimed the ambulance was safer waiting than moving through what he described as confusion. His words came faster now, stacking on top of each other, polished by repetition. This was familiar ground, policy language, training language, the kind of language that usually ended questions. Judge Judy listened without reacting. The officer leaned into that silence, mistaking it for agreement. He spoke about authority, about judgment calls, about how civilians did not always understand what officers saw from the street. He reminded the courtroom indirectly but clearly that he wore the uniform for a reason. From the gallery, the EMT did not move. Their eyes stayed fixed forward, expression unreadable. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly. "Officer," she said evenly, "you testified that your actions were necessary for safety." "Yes, Your Honor," he replied quickly. Too quickly. She nodded once. "Then there should be documentation." The word hung there. The officer blinked. "I am not sure what you mean." She did not repeat herself. She simply reached for a file on the bench and opened it slowly, page by page, as if time itself were no longer urgent. "Your report mentions traffic congestion," she said. "It does not mention an ambulance." The officer shifted in his seat. It was an evolving situation. "Everything is," she replied calmly. "That does not excuse omission." She looked up at him then, eyes steady. "Was your dash camera operating that day?" The officer hesitated, just a fraction of a second. But the pause was visible, measurable. "Yes," he said. "Standard operation." Judge Judy nodded again as if she had expected that answer. "Good." She turned slightly toward the bailiff. "Please cue the dashcam footage from the cruiser at the intersection." The courtroom reacted in a ripple, a soft murmur, a shuffle of bodies adjusting in their seats. The officer's confidence flickered, not gone, but disturbed, like a reflection broken by movement. He raised a hand slightly. "Your Honor, the footage may not reflect the full context." "That is rarely the case," she said, not unkindly. The screen at the side of the courtroom came to life. A frozen frame appeared, a quiet intersection, midday light, cars stopped at odd angles. The officer's cruiser sat exactly where the EMT had described it. Sideways, parked, engine off. The officer watched the screen now, eyes locked, jaw tight. His earlier ease had drained into something sharper, more alert, less amused. Judge Judy did not speak as the footage prepared to roll. She let the silence stretch long enough for the weight of what was coming to settle in. "Officer," she said finally without looking away from the screen, "you were very clear with this court." The video unpaused. "And now," she continued softly, "we will see if reality agrees." The first few seconds played, and with them, the story he had built began to loosen its grip. The footage played without mercy. There was no dramatic angle, no shaky camera, just a wide, steady view of the intersection under ordinary daylight. Cars sat idle. The officer's cruiser rested sideways, exactly as the EMT described. Engine off, doors closed. No urgency in the frame at all. Then, the ambulance appeared. Its lights flashed hard against the screen, red and white pulsing like a warning the world should not ignore. The siren bled faintly through the courtroom speakers, distorted but unmistakable. A few heads in the gallery tilted, as if the sound alone pulled something loose inside them. The officer shifted in his seat. On screen, he stepped into view. Not running, not signaling. He walked slowly, almost lazily, toward the cruiser. At one point, he stopped to speak with a civilian near the curb. The audio caught fragments of laughter. Casual. Unconcerned. Judge Judy leaned forward. The EMT did not look at the screen. Their eyes stayed fixed on the bench, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. They had already lived this once. The officer raised his hand. "Your Honor, this does not show what was happening outside the frame." Judge Judy did not acknowledge the interruption. She reached out and tapped the desk lightly. The bailiff rewound the footage. Again. They watched the moment where the ambulance inched forward. The pause. The hand gestures from inside the cab. The officer's response, a dismissive wave. Then the laugh, clearer this time, louder. The officer spoke quickly now. "That was taken out of context. I was attempting to calm a situation." Judge Judy's voice cut through, measured and precise. "You appear calm already." The courtroom absorbed that. She rewound again, slower, frame by frame. She pointed, not accusing, just directing attention. "Here," she said, "your vehicle is stationary." Another tap. "Here, the ambulance signals." Another. "Here, you turn away." The officer's shoulders tightened. His earlier ease was gone, replaced by irritation that struggled to stay contained. He leaned forward, elbows pressing into his knees. "I made a judgment call." "You made several," she replied. The EMT finally looked up. Their eyes flicked to the screen for a brief second, then away again. Too much. Judge Judy turned her gaze back to the officer. "You testified that you were managing traffic." "Yes." She gestured toward the screen. "Show me." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That is not all of it." "No," she said evenly. "But it is enough to raise questions." The courtroom felt tighter now, air drawn thin by the weight of what could no longer be explained away. The officer's leg bounced once, then stopped when he realized he was doing it. He sat back, jaw set, eyes forward. Judge Judy folded her hands. "Officer," she said, her tone unchanged. "This footage contradicts your testimony in multiple places." She paused, letting that land. "And when testimony and evidence disagree," she continued, "the evidence does not apologize." The officer swallowed. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, studying him the way she had earlier, but now there was something else beneath the calm. Not anger, scrutiny. "One more thing," she said. The room went still. "On the day of this incident," she asked, "had you consumed any alcohol before reporting to duty?" The question landed softly. Too softly. For half a second, the officer did not react. His face stayed neutral, trained, as if he had not fully processed what was asked. Then his eyes narrowed, just slightly, and his back stiffened against the chair. "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Absolutely not." The word echoed in the quiet room. Judge Judy did not respond right away. She did not challenge him. She simply watched him. The way someone watches water after a stone has been thrown, not for the splash, but for the ripples. "You are certain," she said calmly. "Yes," he replied, voice sharper now. "I was on duty. I would never—" She raised one hand, stopping the sentence without force. "I did not ask about your intentions," she said. "I asked about consumption." The officer exhaled through his nose, irritation flashing across his face before he could hide it. "No alcohol," he repeated. "None." Judge Judy glanced down at her notes. She did not look convinced, but she did not accuse him either. Instead, she began listing details, each one delivered without emotion. "In the footage," she said, "your speech is uneven." A pause. "You appear unsteady when turning." Another pause. "And you laugh at a moment that does not call for humor." The officer leaned forward, palms pressing against his thighs. "That is subjective," he said. "I was dealing with stress. High-pressure situations can look different on camera." "Stress does not slur words," she replied evenly. The courtroom reacted with a low murmur. The officer's jaw tightened. He glanced briefly toward the gallery, then back to the bench, as if looking for support that was no longer there. Judge Judy turned another page. "Were you administered a sobriety test following the incident?" she asked. The officer hesitated. "Not long. Just long enough." "No," he said. "There was no cause." "No breathalyzer," she clarified. "No." "No blood test?" "No." "No written request for evaluation." The officer shifted again. "It was not required." Judge Judy looked up. "According to departmental guidelines," she said, "any incident involving delayed emergency response permits discretionary testing." She let that word sit between them. Discretionary. "So," she continued, "you had the option." The officer swallowed. "Yes." "And you chose not to." "Yes." The EMT lowered their gaze, hands tightening together, not in anger now, in something heavier, disappointment maybe, or recognition. Judge Judy closed the file in front of her with deliberate care. "Officer," she said, "when authority is involved in harm, transparency is not optional." He straightened again, voice rising. "There was no proof I was impaired." "That," she replied, "is often the result of not looking." Silence stretched across the courtroom. The officer sat rigid, eyes fixed forward, his confidence no longer loud enough to fill the space. Something about the room had shifted. Not dramatic, subtle, irreversible. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, studying him once more. "Let us talk," she said, "about what you did immediately after the ambulance left." The officer blinked. "Specifically," she added, "who you contacted." His breath caught, just once. If someone has the power to stop the truth from being tested, should that power ever belong to them? The officer straightened as if the uniform itself might speak for him. He adjusted his collar, tugged once at the sleeve, and lifted his chin. "I have served this department for 14 years, he said, voice firm again, rehearsed. "I have responded to hundreds of emergencies. I have put my life on the line. I do not deserve to have my integrity questioned like this." The words were familiar, comfortable. They had worked before. Judge Judy did not react. She waited until the sentence finished, until the last echo faded, and then she leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively, deliberately. "Your years of service," she said, "are not on trial." The officer frowned. "Then what is?" "Your choices," she replied. "On one specific afternoon." He opened his hands in a gesture meant to look reasonable. "People make mistakes." "They do," she agreed. "But mistakes do not hide behind procedure." The courtroom felt tight again, like a held breath. The officer tried another angle, softer this time. He spoke about stress, long shifts, being short-staffed. He mentioned the weight of responsibility, the pressure of always being watched, always being judged. Judge Judy listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded once. "You are correct about one thing," she said. "Your job is difficult." Relief flickered across his face. "That is why," she continued, "the standard is higher." The relief vanished. She stood then. Not fully, just enough to shift the energy in the room. "When you wear a uniform," she said, "you do not gain immunity, you accept accountability." The officer shook his head slightly. "This feels like punishment." "No," she said calmly. "This is scrutiny." She gestured toward the EMT. That person did not have the option to delay. They did not have the option to look away. Neither did the patient. The EMT remained still, eyes forward, presence heavy with everything unsaid. Judge Judy turned back to the officer. "You had authority at that intersection," she said. "Authority to move, authority to act, authority to protect." She paused. "You used it to do none of those." The officer's mouth tightened. His voice rose again, sharper now, edged with panic. "I followed my judgment." "And judgment," she replied, "is only respected when it aligns with reality." She picked up a single sheet from the bench. "After the ambulance left," she said, "you did not request medical review. You did not file an amended report. You did not notify emergency command." He swallowed. "You did make one call," she added. The officer's eyes lifted, just slightly, enough. Judge Judy's tone remained even, almost gentle. "Tell me who you called." He hesitated, the pause longer this time. The courtroom seemed to lean toward him, waiting. Finally, he answered. Quietly. "My supervisor." Judge Judy nodded as if confirming something she already knew. She glanced at the bailiff. "Please bring up the call log," she said. The officer froze, because for the first time, it was no longer about what he said. It was about what he tried to control next. The screen did not show video this time. That alone was enough to unsettle the room. Judge Judy nodded once at the bailiff, and the image shifted. No moving footage, no sound, just a clean digital display, numbers, timestamps, a call log pulled from the officer's own records. The officer leaned forward instinctively, as if proximity could change what he was seeing. "Let us be precise," Judge Judy said, her voice steady, almost clinical. "This is your personal phone activity from the afternoon in question." She did not look at him when she said it. Her eyes stayed on the screen. The first entry appeared highlighted. A call placed minutes after the ambulance rerouted. Not to dispatch, not to emergency command, not to medical review. The officer's breathing changed. Shallow, controlled, but faster than before. Judge Judy let the silence stretch before speaking again. "This call was not logged through departmental channels," she said. "It was not documented in your report." The officer cleared his throat. "It was a brief call." "That is not the issue," she replied. She stood now, fully, and stepped slightly to the side so the courtroom could see the screen clearly. The movement was small, but it shifted the balance of the room. This was no longer a discussion. It was an examination. "The timing matters," she continued. "The ambulance had already been forced to reroute. The delay had already occurred. The consequences were already in motion." She paused. "And yet," she said, "your first action was not to correct, report, or assess." The officer swallowed hard. Judge Judy turned toward him at last. "Who did you call?" He hesitated. The pause was long enough to feel physical. His eyes flicked toward the gallery, then back to the bench. His jaw tightened, then loosened again. "My supervisor," he said quietly. The words landed with a dull weight. Judge Judy nodded slowly. "And what was the purpose of that call?" He shifted in his seat. "To inform them of the situation." She raised an eyebrow. "Just one." "Inform," she repeated. "Yes." She tapped the desk lightly. "You did not inform dispatch." Another tap. "You did not inform emergency medical command." Another. "You did not document the call." Her voice never rose. "So," she said, "help me understand what you were informing your supervisor about, that could not wait for proper channels." The officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. When he spoke, his voice sounded thinner. "I wanted guidance." "Guidance," she repeated calmly. "Or protection." The word hit harder than any accusation so far. The EMT looked up sharply. For the first time since taking the stand, their eyes met the officer's. Judge Judy did not press him immediately. She let the silence do its work. In that quiet, the officer's confidence finally cracked into something unmistakable. Fear. "You made that call," she said slowly, "before anyone asked questions." She turned back to the screen and highlighted the timestamp again. You called before the complaint, before the report, before the footage surfaced. The officer's hands curled into fists against his thighs. Judge Judy faced him once more, her expression unreadable. Officer, she said, people call supervisors for many reasons. She paused. But they call this early for only one. The room held its breath. And now, she continued, we are going to talk about what you were trying to get ahead of. The officer stared at the screen, because in that moment he finally understood. This was no longer about a blocked ambulance. It was about a narrative he tried to control, and it was about to collapse. Judge Judy did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The call was placed at 2:14 p.m., she said, eyes on the screen. The ambulance rerouted at 2:12. The numbers glowed quietly, unforgiving. The officer stared at them as if they might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. That is a 2-minute gap, Judge Judy continued. In those 2 minutes, you did not notify dispatch. You did not contact emergency medical command. You did not request supervisory review through official channels. She turned toward him slowly. You reached for your personal phone. The officer swallowed. I was trying to be proactive. About what? She asked. He hesitated. The pause was heavier now, less controlled. I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. Judge Judy tilted her head. Handled, she repeated. Or framed. The word landed like a quiet detonation. A murmur moved through the gallery, then faded as quickly as it started. The EMT's posture stiffened, eyes locked on the officer now, waiting. Judge Judy tapped the desk once. That call, she said, was not logged, it was not reported, it was not disclosed until compelled by evidence. The officer shook his head, voice tightening. I did not do anything wrong. Then explain this, she replied calmly. She gestured toward the screen again. A new detail appeared beneath the call log. Duration, nearly 4 minutes. That is not a courtesy call, Judge Judy said. That is a conversation. The officer's jaw clenched. My supervisor told me to document it later. The courtroom reacted instantly, not loud, not dramatic, just a collective shift, like a truth-finding oxygen. Judge Judy's eyes sharpened. So you were advised to delay documentation. I was told to wait, he said, correcting himself too late. She nodded slowly. Wait for what? He opened his mouth, then stopped. His shoulders sagged just a fraction, the first visible sign that the uniform was no longer holding him upright. Judge Judy stepped closer to the edge of the bench. When a public servant delays documentation, she said, it is usually for one of 2 reasons. She paused. Either the truth is incomplete, she continued, or it is inconvenient. The officer's breathing grew shallow. He rubbed his palms against his thighs, a nervous motion he could no longer control. You called your supervisor, Judge Judy said, before the facts were known, before the outcome was clear, before anyone could question your decisions. She looked directly at him now. That is not transparency. Silence pressed in from all sides. That, she said softly, is damage control. The officer looked down at the table, not in defiance, in calculation, the kind that comes too late. Judge Judy straightened. So, let us be honest now, she said. During that call, were you advised to leave the scene? The officer's head snapped up. His eyes widened just slightly. No, he said quickly, then quieter. I was advised to go home. The courtroom froze. Judge Judy did not react immediately. She let the weight of that admission settle where it belonged. Go home, she repeated. The EMT's breath caught audibly. Judge Judy closed the file in front of her with measured care. Officer, she said, that advice was not given for public safety. She leaned forward. It was given to protect you. The officer stared straight ahead, realization washing over his face as the truth finally caught up with him. Because now the question was no longer what happened at the intersection. It was how far the cover-up reached. If someone uses authority to get ahead of the truth, does the badge excuse it, or does it make the betrayal worse? The words hung in the air long after he said them. Go home. The officer sat frozen, eyes fixed on a point just above the bench, as if looking directly at Judge Judy had suddenly become too dangerous. His earlier confidence was gone now, replaced by something thinner, exposed. Judge Judy did not move. She did not speak right away. She let the silence press in, because silence had a way of stripping lies down to their bones. You were advised to leave the scene, she said at last, calm and exact, after an ambulance was delayed. He nodded once, barely. And you followed that advice? Yes. The EMT shifted in their seat, the movement sharp this time, not restrained, not polite. Their eyes stayed locked on the officer, disbelief finally pushing through exhaustion. Judge Judy folded her hands. That instruction, she said, did not come from protocol. The officer swallowed. It came from a superior. Who was not present, she replied. Who did not assess the patient, who did not witness the delay. Her voice remained even, but each sentence landed harder than the last. So let us stop pretending, she continued. This was not about safety. It was about optics. The officer shook his head weakly. I was told to cool off. That is all. To cool off, she repeated, after an emergency response was obstructed. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his tone. You do not understand the pressure. Everything gets twisted. One complaint can end a career. Judge Judy met his eyes. Only when it is true. That stopped him. She leaned back slightly, creating distance without disengaging. You testified earlier that you had nothing to hide, she said, and yet you left the scene, delayed documentation, avoided testing, and contacted a supervisor through personal channels. She let the list breathe. Those are not the actions of someone confident in the truth. The officer's hands trembled now. He pressed them flat against his thighs, trying to still them. I panicked, he said quietly. The word surprised even him. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. About what? He hesitated again, but this time the pause felt different, less calculated, more human. I knew it looked bad, he admitted. I knew people would assume things. Assume, she echoed. Yes. She nodded slowly. When you act in ways that resemble guilt, she said, assumptions are no longer the problem. The EMT let out a breath they had been holding too long. Judge Judy turned slightly, addressing the room as much as the officer. A badge does not erase consequences, she said. It magnifies them. She looked back at him. Because when someone with authority lies, the damage spreads further. The officer's voice cracked. Just once. I did not mean for anyone to get hurt. She did not soften. Intent does not heal harm. The room felt heavy now, not tense, weighted, as if everyone understood they were watching something irreversible unfold. Judge Judy glanced down at her notes one more time, then closed them. There is one question left, she said quietly. The officer looked up. Before you were told to go home, she asked, had you been drinking earlier that day? His breath caught, and this time, no amount of silence could save him. The question did not sound accusatory. That was what made it dangerous. Judge Judy's voice stayed level, almost gentle, as it settled into the room. Before you were told to go home, she asked, had you been drinking earlier that day? The officer did not answer. At first, it looked like defiance. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed forward. The training kicked in. Hold the line, wait it out, say nothing that could not be unsaid. Then his breathing betrayed him. It hitched once, then again. Shallow, uneven, like someone trying to slow a fall that had already begun. No, he said finally. The word came out weaker than before. Not sharp, not certain. Judge Judy did not respond immediately. She did not argue. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable, patient in a way that felt deliberate. "You are under oath," she said quietly. He nodded, too quickly. She leaned forward, just a fraction. "I am not asking if you intended to be impaired," she said. "I am asking whether you consumed alcohol." The officer's eyes flicked down to the table, his fingers curled, then uncurled. The courtroom felt suspended, like the moment before something breaks. "I had a drink," he said. The words landed softly, almost carefully, as if he hoped they might pass unnoticed. Judge Judy did not move. "One?" she asked. He hesitated. Again. "A couple," he corrected. The EMT's breath caught. Someone in the gallery shifted sharply in their seat. The sound echoed louder than it should have. "A couple," Judge Judy repeated. "Before your shift." "Yes," he said. His voice cracked this time. "But hours before, I was fine." "Fine," she said calmly. "Enough to avoid testing." He swallowed hard. "I did not think—" She raised a hand, stopping him. "Thinking is not the issue." She let the silence do its work again, long enough for the weight of his admission to spread through the room. "And this was the first time," she continued evenly, "you reported to duty after drinking?" He shook his head automatically, then stopped. The movement froze halfway. Everyone saw it. Judge Judy's eyes sharpened, not with anger, but with focus. "Answer the question." The officer closed his eyes. "No," he said. The word sounded heavier than any before it. "No," he repeated quieter. It was not the first time. The courtroom did not gasp. It did not erupt. It did something worse. It went still. The EMT lowered their head, one hand rising to cover their mouth, not in shock, in recognition. Judge Judy sat back slowly, absorbing the truth now fully exposed. "So this," she said, "was not a lapse." He shook his head again, tears pressing at the corners of his eyes now. "I thought I could manage it," he said. "I always did." "Until you couldn't," she replied. He nodded once, a small, broken motion. "Until someone paid for it." Judge Judy looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different weight. Not judgment, finality. "You did not just betray procedure," she said. "You betrayed trust." She closed the file in front of her, the sound crisp in the silence. "And now," she continued, "we are going to talk about consequences." The officer stared at the table, shoulders slumped, the uniform finally unable to hold him together. Because in that moment, he understood something too late. This was no longer about what he did wrong. It was about how long he had been getting away with it. The room did not move when the truth landed. No murmurs, no shifting chairs. Just the quiet sound of a man breathing through something he could no longer outrun. The officer's shoulders sagged forward, the tension finally draining from them, as if his body had given up trying to hold the lie in place. His hands trembled openly now. He did not bother hiding it. There was nothing left to protect. "I never thought it would come to this," he said, voice low, frayed at the edges. "I told myself I was careful." Judge Judy remained still, watching him not with anger, but with something heavier. "Experience. You told yourself," she replied calmly. "That is often how this begins." He nodded, eyes still down. Words started spilling now, no longer measured. Stress, long hours, sleepless nights. He spoke about pressure like it was a weight that had been slowly pressing him flat, about how one drink became two, how two became routine, how routine became invisible. "I did my job," he said weakly. "Most days I did it well." "No one is questioning that," Judge Judy said. "They are questioning the days you did not." The officer's breathing grew uneven. His voice cracked, not loudly, but deeply. "I did not think I was hurting anyone." Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "That is the lie," she said. "Not the drinking. The belief that harm requires intent." The EMT closed their eyes. just for a moment. When they opened them again, there was no anger left, only exhaustion. "I kept telling myself I would stop," the officer whispered, "after the next shift, after things calmed down." She nodded once. "They never do." Silence returned, thicker now. The officer wiped his face with the back of his hand, an unguarded gesture that stripped away whatever authority the uniform once gave him. He looked smaller, human, broken in a way that no punishment could exaggerate. Judge Judy allowed the moment to breathe. Then she reached for her notes. "Loss of control," she said quietly, "does not begin at the intersection. It begins long before anyone else notices." She looked directly at him. "And it ends when accountability arrives." The officer looked up at last. His eyes were wet, clear. "I am ready to take responsibility," he said, "whatever that means." Judge Judy held his gaze for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried no triumph, only certainty. "Responsibility," she said, "is not something you claim when you are caught." She closed the folder with deliberate care. "It is something you live with after." The sound echoed through the courtroom like a door closing. Judge Judy straightened, posture firm again, the space between empathy and justice drawn cleanly back into place. "I am prepared to rule," she said. The officer exhaled, not in relief, in surrender. And everyone in the room understood the same thing at once. This was no longer a reckoning in progress. It was a conclusion, waiting to be spoken. Judge Judy did not raise the gavel. She did not need to. She remained seated, hands resting calmly on the bench, eyes fixed on the man before her. The courtroom leaned into the stillness, sensing that whatever came next would not be dramatic, but it would be final. "This court is not here to punish you for who you are," she said, her voice even, controlled. "It is here to address what you chose to do." The officer stood motionless, shoulders slumped, gaze lowered. The uniform hung differently on him now. Not proud, not commanding, just fabric. Judge Judy began carefully, outlining the facts as if placing each one gently but firmly on the table. The blocked ambulance, the delayed response, the failure to act, the unreported call, the avoided testing, the admission of alcohol use, not as accusations, as a sequence. "A chain," she said, "not a single mistake." She explained that authority did not collapse in one moment. It eroded through choices, quiet ones, convenient ones, the kind that felt small until someone else paid the price. The EMT listened, eyes forward, posture still. Each word landed like confirmation rather than relief. Judge Judy's tone never sharpened. That was what made it powerful. "When emergency services are obstructed," she said, "the risk is not theoretical. It is immediate." She paused. "You created that risk." The officer closed his eyes. "This court finds that your actions directly interfered with emergency response," she continued. "You are liable for the consequences that followed." There was no gasp, no reaction at all. The words did not shock. They settled. Judge Judy detailed the judgment plainly. Financial responsibility, referral to departmental review, mandatory reporting to oversight authorities. No flourish, no lecture, just consequence, delivered cleanly. "This ruling is not about revenge," she said. "It is about accountability." She reached for the gavel then, not dramatically, not hard. One measured strike. The sound echoed once and faded. The officer did not flinch. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected this outcome long before it was spoken. Judge Judy looked at him one last time. "Justice does not need to shout," she said. "It needs to be understood." She set the gavel down. "And today," she added quietly, "it is." The courtroom remained still as Judge Judy gathered her papers. The officer stood there, absorbing the weight of what had been decided. The EMT exhaled slowly, a breath held for far too long, finally finding release. Nothing felt triumphant, but something felt settled, and sometimes that is the loudest justice there is. The courtroom did not empty right away. People lingered in their seats as if standing too quickly might disturb something fragile. Papers rustled softly. A chair creaked. The officer remained where he was, hands at his sides, eyes unfocused. The verdict had not shattered him. It had hollowed him out. Judge Judy looked down at the bench, then back up, and for the first time since the ruling, her expression softened. Not with sympathy, but with gravity. "This is the part people misunderstand," she said calmly. "They think accountability is about humiliation." She shook her head once. "It is not." The officer lifted his eyes slightly, just enough to listen. "Arrogance convinces people they are untouchable," she continued. "It whispers that rules are flexible when you are important enough, that consequences are for other people." Her voice never rose. It did not need to. She gestured gently toward the EMT. "But emergencies do not care who you are," she said. "They do not wait for confidence. They do not respect authority." The EMT stood still, hands resting together now, shoulders lower than before. There was no triumph on their face, only tired relief. Judge Judy returned her gaze to the officer. "You did not wake up planning to cause harm," she said. "But you woke up believing you were above scrutiny." The officer swallowed. "That belief," she continued, "is what cost you today." She explained that the loss he was facing was not sudden, it was cumulative, built from every moment he chose comfort over responsibility, silence over transparency, pride over duty. The courtroom felt quieter with every word, as if even the walls understood what was being said. "This is not about one bad afternoon," she said. "It is about a pattern that went unchallenged too long." The officer nodded slowly. There were no tears now, just understanding. Judge Judy gathered her papers, then paused. "I hope," she said, "that what happens next for you includes reflection." She met his eyes one last time. "Because consequences do not exist to destroy people. They exist to wake them up." She stepped back from the bench. The EMT finally turned, preparing to leave. As they passed the officer, there was no glare, no comment, just a brief pause, a shared breath. Then they kept walking. The officer watched them go. When the courtroom doors opened, light spilled in from the hallway, soft and ordinary. The kind of light that keeps moving forward, regardless of who is ready for it. Judge Judy exited without ceremony. What remained was the cost. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Before you hear how this ends, pause and ask yourself, when power finally answers to truth, is that punishment? Or is it the first real chance to change? The hallway outside the courtroom felt quieter than it should have. No sirens, no voices raised in urgency, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the soft echo of footsteps moving on without ceremony. The officer stood near the doorway for a moment, unsure where to go now that no one was watching him leave. His uniform no longer felt like armor. It felt like weight. Down the corridor, the EMT paused near a window. Sunlight spilled across the floor in pale stripes, ordinary and indifferent. They stood there, breathing it in, letting their shoulders drop for the first time that day. The case was over, the questions were answered. But the memory of that intersection still lived somewhere behind the eyes. Judge Judy emerged last. She did not rush. She did not linger. She walked with the calm rhythm of someone who had carried justice long enough to know its cost. As she passed the bench one final time, she paused briefly, resting her hand on the wood as if acknowledging the silence it now held. The courtroom was emptying. Chairs sat slightly askew, papers lay forgotten. A space that had been heavy with consequence only minutes earlier now felt still, not relieved, not triumphant, just settled. Outside, traffic moved as it always did. Cars flowed through intersections. An ambulance passed in the distance, lights flashing, siren calling out to a world that still needed saving. This time, nothing stood in its way. The officer stepped outside and shielded his eyes from the sun. He did not look toward the sound. He already knew what it meant. Responsibility did not end when the noise stopped. It began there. Judge Judy exited through a side door, unnoticed by most. She did not look back. She rarely did. The work was never about watching people fall. It was about making sure the truth stood long enough to be seen. The EMT finally turned away from the window and walked on, carrying forward what could not be undone, but also what had finally been acknowledged. Inside the empty courtroom, the echo of the gavel had faded completely. What remained was quieter than justice usually feels, but stronger, because arrogance had met truth. Power had answered to responsibility. And when the sirens finally faded, something far more lasting was left behind. Not noise, not spectacle, just consequence. And the uncomfortable peace that comes when justice does not shout, but holds.